Did you know that the global CBD market is projected to hit like $47 billion by 2028?
Wow.
That's a lot of CBD.
It is.
And you've been asking for it. So we're going behind the scenes of CBD manufacturing today, like from the very beginning to what you see on the shelves.
Sounds good.
And thankfully, you've sent us some really detailed articles because, to be honest, I'm dying to know, like, what are we even talking about when we say high CBD hemp cultivars?
Well, you hit the nail on the head by saying talking about, because it really is about the conversation we're having around the plant itself.
Okay.
Different cultivars, even though they're the same species, can have totally different levels of CBD and THC.
Right.
And so you wouldn't use just any old hemp to create CBD products.
Right. Just like you wouldn't use, like, bread flour to bake a cake.
Exactly. Exactly. You want to make sure you're choosing the right cultivar for the job.
Okay, so it's all about intentionality right from the start.
Yes. And even beyond just the levels of CBD and THC, breeders are now looking at all the different cannabinoids and terpenes present in the plant.
Okay.
For example, some cultivars are being developed to have higher levels of a terpene called myrcene, which is known for its relaxing and potentially sedative effects.
Interesting.
So it's really, really fascinating how they can actually fine-tune these plants for specific purposes.
So once they, like, get these carefully cultivated hemp plants all grown up, then what happens? Is it just harvest time and throw it in a giant juicer?
You know, that's funny you say that because I actually had that exact thought when I first started looking into this.
Yeah.
But it turns out it's a lot more complicated. And this is, I think, where a lot of new hemp businesses kind of get tripped up because they underestimate the importance of this next stage,
Okay.
which is the post-harvest stage.
Yeah.
So we're talking about drying, storing, and processing.
Right.
And if you don't do those properly, it can have a huge impact on the quality and the safety of the final product.
Yeah, that story about the bird's nest and the drying barn really kind of freaked me out a little bit.
Right.
Like, I know it's a plant, but you don't really think about, like,
Oh.
those kinds of things.
Right. It seems so simple at the start.
Yeah.
And then you realize how much care needs to be taken to make sure that the final product is safe.
Yeah. So speaking of safety, can you remind us about those GXP systems again that the articles talked about?
Yeah, so we're talking about good agricultural practices when we talk about growing. And then we move into good manufacturing practices. And then, of course, we're going to talk about good distribution practices. And these are so important because they're like the gold standard for making sure that everything is safe, effective, and following the rules.
Yeah, like having a watchful eye on the whole thing from seed to shelf.
Absolutely.
Making sure that it's all good.
Exactly. And then once you've got all that sorted, it's time to actually get the CBD out of the plant.
Yeah, this is where it gets, I think, really interesting for me because
Okay.
they mentioned this CO2 extraction in one of the articles, and it sounds very technical, like, are we talking spaceships and lasers here?
Maybe not spaceships and lasers,
Okay.
but it's definitely a high-tech process.
Ah,
It's actually really interesting how they use CO2 extraction.
okay.
It uses carbon dioxide, but under high pressure, and that pulls out the cannabinoids like CBD from the plant.
So it's like a solvent.
Yeah, exactly. But the cool part is that it just evaporates away afterward.
Oh, okay. So no harsh chemicals or anything. Is that better for the environment too then?
It is. It's way better for the environment. One of the big advantages they talk about in the articles.
Okay, that's good. So we've got this raw CBD oil now, but it's not ready to be bottled up yet.
Yeah.
The articles talked about all these refining steps like winterization. What is that?
It sounds a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But winterization is basically where they cool the extract down to a really low temperature.
Oh, wow.
And that causes all these impurities, like the fats and waxes, to solidify, and then they can just filter them out.
So it's like separating the good stuff from the not so good stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like straining out the lumps in your gravy or something.
Haha, exactly. So what about that distillation thing?
So that's where it gets really high tech. They use this thing called a fractional distillation apparatus,
Fancy.
and that separates all the different cannabinoids based on their boiling points.
Oh, okay. So they can isolate just the CBD.
Exactly. And here's the really cool part. Remember we were talking about those terpenes earlier?
Yeah.
They can actually capture those separately during this process.
Oh, really? Why would they do that?
Well, it's all because of something called the entourage effect.
A entourage effect.
Yeah, you heard of that?
No, what is that?
So basically, all the different cannabinoids, terpenes, and other stuff in the plant, they all work together
Okay.
to create a more, I guess, well-rounded effect.
Interesting. So it's better to have, like, a little bit of everything.
Sometimes it really depends what you're looking for, which is why you see things labeled full spectrum or broad spectrum. Those have terpenes.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And then just your plain CBD is called isolate.
Right, got it. It's like choosing between a symphony and a solo violin.
A perfect way to put it.
So, speaking of isolates, let's talk about why they're so expensive. Like, some of these were going for almost $10,000 a kilo. $10,000 for real. What makes it cost so much?
It's kind of like, remember how we were talking about all those different stages?
Yeah.
Extraction, refinement.
Mm.
Each one of those steps, you actually lose a little bit of the yield.
Okay.
So to get a tiny amount of that super pure isolate,
Yeah.
you have to start with a huge amount of hemp.
Wow. So it's like really potent then.
Exactly. And when you factor in the equipment, the testing,
Right.
all of that adds up,
Mhm.
especially with those rarer cannabinoids like CBC.
Right, because they're only present in small amounts to begin with.
Exactly. It's like they were saying it's kind of like finding a rare gemstone.
No. Okay.
The harder it is to find, the more it's going to cost.
That makes sense. And more people are wanting it, so it's like supply and demand too.
Yeah, exactly. People are starting to discover all these potential benefits.
So it's like we're just at the tip of the iceberg with all this cannabinoid stuff. Are there any like downsides to all this though? Like challenges the industry's facing?
That's a really good question. And it's something that came up in the articles too. I think one of the biggest challenges right now is the regulation. It's still kind of a new industry, so everything isn't really standardized yet.
So it's kind of the Wild West still out there.
A little bit, yeah. Like there's not a ton of consistency with things like the testing and even the labeling.
So you really got to be careful as a consumer.
Yeah, for sure. Do your research. Look for brands that have that third-party testing. Make sure they're transparent about their methods.
Hmm.
It can be a little confusing to navigate, but it's worth it.
Yeah, definitely. So all this talk about like the industry and stuff, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in one of the articles was how this is actually impacting farmers.
Yes, it's huge for the agricultural industry.
Yeah, like it was talking about how this is a really great opportunity for farmers, especially in areas where maybe the traditional crops aren't doing so hot.
It's a really amazing opportunity for them to diversify.
Yeah, and hemp's like good for the environment too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It needs less water than a lot of other crops, and it can actually help improve the soil.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's awesome. So we've talked about a lot today, those high CBD cultivars, how they're extracted, the prices, even how it's affecting farmers. What's like the one thing you want listeners to remember from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's so much more to CBD than people realize. It's
Yeah.
not just a trend. It's really like this intersection of agriculture, science,
Hmm.
and we're just scratching the surface of what we know about it.
It's really fascinating. So the next time you're like looking at a bottle of CBD oil or something,
Yeah,
think about everything that went into making it.
exactly.
It's a long journey from those hemp fields to like the store shelf.
It really is. And you know what's interesting? While we've been focused on isolating CBD,
Yeah.
some experts think the future might be in using the whole plant.
Really?
Yeah, like harnessing all those different compounds together instead of just isolating them.
Huh. The entourage effect in action.
Exactly. And that's something to think about. Who knows what we might discover by exploring the whole plant?
It's exciting to think about. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into CBD manufacturing. We'll be back next time with another fascinating look at the world of CBD.